What's up, everyone? Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 48, and I'm the host, Kyle Anzalone. On today's show, I'm talking about one of the huge things that Trump could do before he leaves our office, and that's a high-profile pardon. So I'll talk about some of the potential pardons he could give out and why those would be so important. And also, I have a lot of foreign policy news to get to. But before I get into that, I just want to take a quick second to plug the YouTube channel of the show. I highly recommend checking it out because the video version of the show does add a lot. The podcast version is what the old foreign policy focus show was. So you're going to get your news that way. But with the video version, you'll get to see the articles I'm talking about, also the great news ticker that we have. So again, check out the YouTube channel, subscribe, and if you're already listening there, like and share to let people know about it. And with that, let's get into this first story I have, and that is about Edward Snowden and the possibilities of pardoning him. So this article is from Common Dreams, entitled GOP Lawmaker Claims Trump is Listening to the Many of Us Who Are Urging Him to #Pardon Snowden. The GOP lawmaker referred to in the headline is Representative Matt Gaetz of Florida, who I've talked about on the show quite a bit recently, pointing out that, look, hey, this guy has some things that I don't agree with that he believes. I'm a libertarian. He's obviously not. However, there are some things that this guy is really good on, and we could add another one to the list, and that is he is somebody who, I don't know, I don't think he could call up the president and get a meeting, but him on Twitter, him going on Tucker Carlson, he's able to generate appearances within like the Trump orbit that he definitely can get his message in front of Donald Trump, and is somebody who has been loyal to Trump throughout. And so I think is likely somebody who Trump will at least, listen to, and doesn't have a natural bias against. And so Gates says that, Trump is listening to the people who are telling him to pardon Snowden, and I guess he counts himself in that court. Maybe we could add to that somebody like Rand Paul, who, look, there's a lot of reasons people don't like Rand Paul. There are some reasons I don't like Rand Paul. A lot of the reasons people don't like Rand Paul are stupid. And this is one of those things that Rand Paul is great on. So, if he is saying things, nice things about Donald Trump, maybe one of the things he could do with that influence that he's hopefully, gaining by selling his soul on stupid stuff, could be, to help us pardon Snowden. So I'm not optimistic that Trump is going to pardon Snowden or, really any of these high profile targets before he gets out of office. I had a funny Twitter exchange with Michael Bolden from the 10th Amendment Center. People were suggesting that Trump may pardon Julian Assange, which I think is even less likely than Trump pardoning Edward Snowden. I'll get into the details of that maybe in a second. And he said, it's not going to happen. And I said, I think you're right. I think the problem is that Donald Trump could actually be convinced that it's a good idea to pardon any of these guys, because I think the argument is really obvious, and anybody who isn't Liz Cheney, whose father is guilty of war crimes and has a vested interest in making sure, Assange goes to jail. So those documents that Assange helped to, show the public that exposed her father's war crimes. Well, if he's discredited, then, all the crimes her father is guilty of seem less important. So, there are people with their institutionalized incentives to not like Julian Assange, Edward Snowden, etc. However, it's pretty clear that Julian Assange is a journalist and his prosecution violates the First Amendment. It's pretty clear that it was actually the director of national intelligence, James Clapper, that lied to Congress and who should be in jail about the U.S. mass spying program, saying it didn't exist. And it's Edward Snowden who should be given a pardon and lauded as a hero for having the bravery to expose these documents. But rather, Clapper is somebody who's often lauded in the media and cited as an expert on these Russiagate issues, and Edward Snowden is in Russia. Now, one of the things used against Snowden that I want to just take a second to highlight is people often say, well, he is in Russia, and so, he gave his intelligence to the Russians and all this. Now, the fact that Snowden is in Russia is a action by the Obama government, where he was actually, I believe, trying to get to a Latin American country, and he had his passport revoked by the Obama administration while he was in the air, going from one flight that was going to go to Russia to a connecting flight, I believe, in Ecuador. And so, the fact that he's in Russia is because of the Obama administration. He would have been in Ecuador, a country that may have been a lot easier for them to extradite Assange from, as we've now seen, rather than, him being in Russia, which was orchestrated by the Obama administration. Again, one, the impacts that has is really discrediting the things that Snowden has said. I might have confused him with Assange there a couple times, but yeah, Edward Snowden in Russia, and he is there because of the Obama administration. Yeah, so obviously Snowden should be pardoned. He's an absolute national hero. I don't know if Donald Trump will. I guess I see Snowden maybe being more likely because, first, he is an American. He is a whistleblower that obviously exposed crimes, violations of the Fourth Amendment, the Bill of Rights. And so I feel like it's very clear cut and easy for people to see. And also that there's probably a little bit less resistance for it, because while Snowden was somebody who leaked documents, unless the government is really stupid, it seems unlikely that Snowden will ever be in a position to leak documents again. And so, he could tour around the U.S., give speeches, and be lauded as a hero. And, they could worry that could provoke other people to leak documents. Whereas Julian Assange is the guy who runs WikiLeaks. He's a publisher. It's like taking out the New York Times versus taking out David Sanger. You know what I mean? You could find somebody to replace David Sanger, whereas the New York Times itself, WikiLeaks itself, Julian Assange is, I think, probably far more essential. So I think it's less likely, and there would be more resistance to Assange. But I mean, if Donald Trump really wanted to do it, he could. I suppose Matt Gaetz or Rand Paul has to know a lawyer that could draft up the actual documents for Trump to sign. My concern is that just in between deciding that it's a good idea and finding a pen and getting somebody to write up the document, there's going to be Mike Pompeo, who thinks these guys are terrorists. There's going to be whoever the attorney general is, Bill Barr for a couple more days, I guess, and then whoever replaces him. Are all Mike Pence. Everybody is going to say, no, you can't do this. No, you can't do this. No, you can't do this. It's not allowed. And I think ultimately that will make it so they don't get pardoned it's the same situation as ending the war in Afghanistan. Now, on the Julian Assange topic, I really hope he pardons Assange. As Snowden said, I think it would be the more important pardon than even himself. At the same time, again, I think politically, and for those reasons, politically, I think it's less likely that the deep state actors in the government would allow this to happen. There's this new recording released by Project Veritas. I'm not sure how they got it, but it's a pretty interesting story here. This is from Dave DeCamp at antiwar.com. He wrote this up. Project Veritas is the site run by James O'Keefe, and this video is verified. And so for people who have skepticism about Project Veritas, that's, I think, appropriate. But it does seem like, this is all accounted for and shown to be true. And that is, in 2011, Julian Assange contacted the State Department. It says that the call was actually happened on August 26, 2011, to let the State Department know that a source from within the government had given him documents that had the names of State Department sources. And so there was a fear that, these sources being, I think a lot of them were in Afghanistan, there was some concern that they could be retaliated against by insurgents in Afghanistan because of their ties and willing to, do business with the American government. And so this has been used against Assange to say, oh, look how reckless this guy is. He's not a journalist. Real journalists don't expose sources, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But this is very misleading. So what actually happened is Julian Assange received the State Department, all the leads from Chelsea Manning. These were the Afghan war logs, the State Department cables, Iraq war logs, and I believe some Guantanamo papers. And he worked with several mainstream media outlets, including The Guardian and I believe the New York Times and a German newspaper. And so, and within working with them, he got associated with this guy, Luke Harding, who I've talked about on the old show, Foreign Policy Focus. He's a Russiagate huckster and an overall dishonest figure. And, the type of person who will write what the CIA sources tell him unquestionably in his newspaper. Anyways, around this time, he wrote a book, and in that book, he had a chapter title that was the encryption code needed to be able to look at the State Department cables. And for whatever reason, Luke Harding publishes it. Had he not published it, the documents wouldn't have come out because Julian Assange wanted to go through and redact anybody's name, apparently. And so that's what they were in the process of doing. But Luke Harding gave everybody the encryption code, and so then they were able to do this. Because of that, Assange contacted the State Department to tell the State Department, hey, you got to let your sources know that this is going on and that they could be compromised. Now, all of this is kind of, I guess, a side issue anyways, because this Pentagon, I believe, looked into and tried to show that somebody was harmed by this. And I don't believe they could during the Chelsea Manning trial, because remember, these are the documents leaked by Chelsea Manning. So, yeah, I mean, that's where that's just, this story here that's been used time and time and again to attack Assange as somebody who doesn't care about human life and therefore he's not a real journalist. And here we have a natural example of him going out of his way to try to talk to the State Department and say, hey, look, you got to talk to these people. Yeah, all right. And I mean, there's a million reasons that Assange deserves a pardon, and really none of it, whether this story played out or not, it doesn't matter. The guy deserves a pardon. He's not even an American citizen. And yeah, he's being prosecuted under the Espionage Act. It honestly makes no sense. But again, because of everything that Assange has exposed and will expose in the future, if he is let out of jail to do the most important work he could possibly do, I think it's I don't think they will allow a pardon of Assange. The last person I want to talk about is Ross Ulbrich. Now, he's probably the least familiar of the three, and in some sense, his pardon would be the least consequential, just because of the huge role and important role of Snowden and Assange. However, Ross Ulbrich may have the most unfair treatment of the three, and that's really saying something here, where he created the website Silk Road, where people are allowed to, anonymously participate in the free market. Some FBI agents came, trumped up a case, and then the judge threw the book at him because she couldn't give him a couple consecutive life sentences. The guy did nothing. You could look into the case if you want. I'll try to find an interview. His mom is one of his great advocates that could really go through and describe what happened in his story and the injustice. I mean, the FBI agents stole money from this guy, right? And that should show that, hey, maybe these people are dishonest and a little bit sketchy. And that actually wasn't even allowed to be brought up at his trial. So there's some really absurd things that happened in Ross's case. And, he is a computer kid, and he's locked up in a supermax prison because the judge decided to throw a book at him because he didn't play by the rules. If people wanted to exchange shards on his website, he allowed it, and that was intolerable to them. So I think Trump could really undo an injustice here by pardoning Ross Ulbrich. And look, this is a young man that could have a bright future if only he were allowed to, and doesn't need to be locked up in jail, sucking up taxpayer money to keep this completely innocent and harmless kid locked up. All right, I think that is what I have on the pardon subject. Ulbrich is probably the most likely of the three. I think Massey or Rand Paul was on a Fox News show pretty recently advocating for this guy's pardon. And this one, I think again is the most likely to happen. I think it'll face the least amount of resistance from the more establishment actors within the Trump administration. But it doesn't mean that any or all three of these couldn't happen. I mean, Donald Trump could tweet out, "I'm pardoning Julian Assange," and just fire people until somebody agrees to do it and help him do it. That's certainly something he could do. I don't know if it's something that he actually will do. Before I get into the foreign policy news I want to talk about on today's show, I want to take a quick second to thank the sponsor of the show, Paloma Verde. Paloma Verde sells CBD products. And let me tell you, it's a stressful time of year for a lot of people. It's Christmas. People are going to tell you, just like they did with Thanksgiving, if you go see grandma, you might kill her. At the same time, it's been a year and people are dying because they haven't seen grandma, and that's really tough too. So if you got, cope with the stresses and anxieties of life, or hell, you've been locked up and sitting on your butt too long, like, myself and most of us have been, think about taking some CBD products to try to make some improvements to help yourself out a little bit. Maybe you'll make the decision in Christmas a little bit more enjoyable. So PalomaVerdeStore.com, go check out their products. There they have education on how CBD could help you. Guys, if you're already a CBD user, these are the products to get, because that they're lab tested and they are what they say they are. So no more random stuff from the head shop that sometimes it feels like it hits you like a truck, and other times you feel like you eat 12 of them. It does absolutely nothing. So check out the products at PalomaVerdeStore.com, and then when you check out, use the promo code PEACE. It'll get you a discount, and let them know that you are supporting and coming from the show. With that, let's get back to the news. The next story I have is this if you pay attention to the mainstream media, CNN, New York Times, Reuters, AP, you saw in the past week this story that, oh my God, Russia hacked, I believe, the Department of Treasury and Commerce. And boy, would you think that they knew for sure it was Russia that did this, or at the very least Russians. But Moon of Alabama, I'm not sure if everybody's familiar. Moon of Alabama is a great blog. The guy who writes it, don't know his actual name, so there's that, but he puts all the links in his research and will respond to people in the comment section. So this piece is really solid, and I want to talk about it. I think he does one of the best jobs of breaking down what's going on here. His article is titled "Media Blames Russia for Cyber Intrusions Without Providing Evidence." So again, you title a story, Russia had our source, Russia has Treasury Department. You think there'd be some evidence behind that, but he says, no, actually not. So we had a report put out by FireEye, and FireEye is this group. I think they're a little bit like Counter-Strike-esque, where they're semi-government. They receive all their funding from the government, and they produce these reports that say these people carried out cyber attacks, and they always blame Russia. In the report, they don't identify any country as being behind the attack. They just say it's an attack by a nation with a top-tier offensive capability, which could include several countries, I believe. In this particular article, Berhard points out that it could include like Russia, China, or Israel, and there's no reason that it actually points to Russia there. What the I guess alleged hack is that it's monitoring the Treasury and Commerce Department's emails. Now, I could see a lot of countries being very interested in this information, and it's because the U.S. is waging a massive economic war against several countries: North Korea, Cuba, Venezuela, Nicaragua, Iran, China, Russia. There's sanctions against Syria. There's several sanctions against Zimbabwe. Now, look, my guess is that Zimbabwe doesn't have the same capabilities to hack as Russia does. But you look at another country like Turkey, who recently received sanctions. One of the reasons you would want to maybe have what's going on these email chains is that if you know either the argument that they're making to sanction you or not, like in the case of Turkey, this has been something that's been debated for several months. Or if you're a country like Iran that receives sanctions put against you seemingly every day, if you could warn somebody that they're going to be sanctioned if they have any overseas assets, they can move them around or something like that, right? Or one of the things that happens is some of these people that get sanctioned like have kids in other countries, and so maybe you could wire your kid a bunch of money that way. They won't be cut off forever, since you can't, get them money after you're sanctioned. Yeah, so if you read the actual stories, it's basically, just saying that they have people familiar with the situation saying that it either had hallmarks of Russia, it looked to be Russia. I forget how David Sanger phrased it, but it was something like all the blueprints of a Russian strike or something like that. And so these are the kind of arguments that you're essentially getting. It isn't evidence or anything like that. It's just saying that, we have sources that say this. Now, I suppose if the past 4 years haven't happened and this was the first alleged Russian cyber attack, or if in the past the anonymous sources that report on Russian cyber attacks have been right, maybe you are a little bit interested in taking these people at face value. However, we have now a 5-year history of them just lying and lying and lying and constantly reporting, oh, Russia did this, Russia did that. And then when, more and more information comes out, they can never actually prove it, if not the actual evidence debunks the claim it was Russia. Now, another problem with this, of course, is that we know from the Vault 7 logs put out by WikiLeaks that at least the US and the CIA has this ability to carry out hacks and make it look like someone else. My guess is that, other countries have that ability. And so if you're wondering, why would Israel want to hack the Treasury Department? They could hack it and make it look like Iran or something like that. Crazy things could happen. People plant false flags all the time. The world's a pretty crazy place. There's no reason to just accept because so-called experts say it was Russia, especially when those people aren't even willing to put their name on records to assume that it was. And they have a pretty poor track record of the past few years. Yeah, so even this one, the David Sanger, how he phrased it is almost certainly a Russian intelligence agency, according to federal and private experts. I mean, they're not saying for sure, so they're not going to have to be wrong or retracted if it wasn't Russia, but they're also making it seem like to anybody who's just reading it, that is absolutely Russia. So both now, Moon of Alabama points out in their article that both FireEye and Microsoft have now looked into it, and they did not attribute a attacker behind it. And so I would just say that, if people are ever able to present actual evidence that proves it was Russia that was monitoring this, and look, in some respects, I kind of understand why they would be interested in knowing which company could possibly be hit by sanctions, or if there was work on the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, how serious the Treasury Department is on putting on sanctions on the companies working on that. Because if they're not very serious about that threat, then you could go ahead and complete the pipeline. But if they are, and this is economic warfare, so in some respects, I feel like this could have almost been like a scouting report. And it's just a part of the war that the U.S. is waging, and not this attack completely out of nowhere. But who knows who even carried it out at this point. The next story I have is on the National Defense Authorization Act, the 2021 NDAA, which has now passed both the House and Senate. Unfortunately, Rand Paul had one of his better moments and did everything he could to try to delay the massive spending bill, but it has now passed both houses, and I believe with a veto-proof majority in both. Now, there's a couple issues with this bill. There's the Trump sideshow issue and then the actual issue. So the Trump sideshow issues are on the renaming the Confederate bases, and less, I guess, an issue because this actually does have some important, which is the Section 230. But at the same time, this is a internet liability thing. It's not really a defense issue at all. but that's what Trump is threatening to veto it over. What I would tell him to veto the bill over are a few huge things. One is Congress is trying to prevent Trump from moving U.S. troops out of Afghanistan and Germany. And so the goal, I guess, is to keep at least 4,000 U.S. troops in Afghanistan, and then not allow the U.S. to take the 12,000 troops out of Germany. Now, the crazy thing is, right, is that Congress is trying to prevent Donald Trump from taking troops out of country. But if he ever wants to put troops in a country like Poland or Iraq or Afghanistan, Congress doesn't demand that he have any authorization whatsoever. And so this is just Congress acting like war hawks. Is very unfortunate to see. Congress, intended by the founding fathers, that had the Constitution worked, the idea was that they were going to be the less militaristic branch, right? That Congress would prevent the president from starting stupid wars. And in this case, they're trying to keep him in. Is rather absurd and unbelievable. Other really bad things in this NDAA include sanctions on the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, which are going to further damage relations between the U.S. and Russia. And so that's horrible. I think that about covers the things I really hate in this NDAA. But I could be forgetting something I've talked about quite a bit on the show. Me and Dave DeCamp broke it down the last show that he was on. And there I was just reading from one of his articles. One of the reasons that I think the sanctions on the Nord Stream 2 pipeline could be so terrible is that we have this New START treaty. I've talked about this on the past on the show, so just for a quick update, it's the Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty, and what it did is it capped the number of nuclear weapons that both the U.S. and Russia had, and I believe also the number of weapons that were actually deployed. Forget what the actual number is. I think it's around 1,500. Yeah, so great that you kept the number of nuclear weapons that each country has. And the idea is that this treaty was going to exist for 10 years. You build on it, and then, you maybe cap it at 500 nuclear weapons the next time around. That's not what happened. In fact, it looks like that the New START deal could fall apart. It's going to expire in February. And there was an option to extend it for 5 years, and the U.S. under Trump, it just wasn't interested, too disorganized, I guess. I mean, I don't see why Trump is particularly opposed to this. If anything, he's kind of been good on the nuclear proliferation issue. But yet he hasn't been able to administratively put together a negotiation team. I think at one point he even put like John Bolton, who just slays arms negotiation agreements. Like his thing he gets off to is, I guess, creating more nuclear weapons in the world, because that's about all he's been effective at doing. And so he put him in charge of these negotiations rather than somebody who could actually go to Russia and at the very least extend New START, if not, have created a better agreement. Now we're way too late to extend New START even for 5 years. Russia's now offering a 1-year extension. I hope, that the Biden administration is like able to have some bad channel talks with Russia. So if the Trump administration fails to move forward and take advantage to extend this for a year to give the Biden administration an opportunity to negotiate this treaty further, I don't know, if those couple weeks that we're gonna have from the time Biden's inaugurated in January 20th to put together a team to send them to Moscow or to meet somewhere and have talks, especially if we're at the same time adding brand new sanctions on the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. It seems like, that it's a recipe for this treaty to be destroyed. And then you have uncapped nuclear weapons at a time when the U.S. is already planning to spend $2 trillion on nuclear weapons. I mean, this could get really stupid, really expensive, and really dangerous if we just start deploying more and more nuclear weapons and making more and more nuclear weapons. We don't want to go back to the peak of the Cold War in that sense. Although I suppose there are some people who do want to go back to that. It was very profitable for them. That's the world they know. They like to, play foreign policy, make the world the way we want it kind of games, and they do it better, I guess, in their Cold War environment. All right, this next article I have from Dave DeCamp, and it's report according to Bloomberg, Biden team plans to reverse Trump's Cuba sanctions. I've talked about this and mentioned it on the show a lot. When you include foreign policy achievements by the Obama administration, it's basically Iran kind of new start, but they actually, ruined relations with Russia, so not really. And then you kind of give them one on Cuba for opening up relations there. Trump undid all of that and added more. My guess was a lot of this was political for him. He ends up winning Florida, and a lot of people attribute that to the Cuban vote. So, that could be part of the thinking there. But the actual result was to impoverish Cubans. I'm sure it had a really bad effect on the Cuban economy, where you had, more Americans coming into the economy. You had the Cuban economy opening up some. And so people were, starting businesses to get American tourism. Well, Americans can't tour around, visit Cuba anymore. Then, they can't go to those businesses go under. And it's likely that, the most entrepreneurial Cubans, who were those, even in the midst of communism, looking to, create a business, start a life like that, got, lost that because of this stupid policy from the Trump administration. Although, Biden reversing is moving in the right direction, there is some lasting damage done by the Trump sanctions and reversing it. Also, the 60-year embargo. What you would like to see, I think, is Biden announcing that the embargo's over, that the hostile policy against Cuba is over. This is no longer the Cold War. Russia's not going to deploy nuclear missiles there. And honestly, it doesn't even matter because we have nuclear submarines all over the place anyways. These are the kind of things that Biden should be saying. And I think he's going to kind of just go the half measure that Obama did, which is open up relations, something that's good. But it's like Trump drawing down to 25,000 or 100 troops in Afghanistan. It could just be undone rather quickly. Talking about Afghanistan, I got a couple stories. The first here from Reuters: top U.S. general meets Taliban in Qatar, calls for reduced violence. The story here pretty much is all in the headline, which is the commander of the Joint Chiefs, General Mark Milley, traveled to Doha to meet with the Taliban delegation there. This is somewhat interesting because, this is a very high-ranking U.S. general meeting with the Taliban, who most Americans see as, somewhat no different than Al-Qaeda, just a bunch of Arabs running around, blowing themselves up, killing Americans for all they know. And yeah, you have a U.S. general meeting with them. And so maybe this is a sign that talks are moving in the right direction. If you have this high profile person going to meet with the Taliban, and hopefully Milley understands that reduced violence also includes on the American side, where we have the Americans still carrying out airstrikes against the Taliban. The other story I have here is just a follow-up on something I've already talked about, but it's such a huge story, which is that the U.S. general, this is referring to CENTCOM head Kenneth McKenzie, says the U.S. has helped the Taliban by launching drone strikes against ISIS. What he says and what it sounds like is that the U.S. basically was monitoring the ISIS area with drones, and they saw an opportunity where the Taliban were fighting ISIS. They took the shot at ISIS to help out the Taliban. If the U.S. is willing to help the Taliban by, spending tens of thousands of dollars on bombs to support their offensives, then we don't need to be fighting in that country anymore. We need to bring the U.S. troops home. We have sanctions against Turkey. This is something I've been talking about on the show for a couple of years now, really. Turkey decided to buy the S-400 air defense system from Russia a few years ago, rather than the Patriot missile system from the U.S. The U.S. said, oh, no, a NATO partner doesn't have the same air defense system as us. So they kicked Turkey out of the F-35 project, although I think Turkey is still making parts for the plane. They're just not able to receive any. And the U.S. Also has been threatening to sanction Turkey's defense industry for, buying the product. They gave Turkey a bunch of outs. If you don't turn on the system, if you don't actually use it, stuff like that, but they're now using it. They have it turned on, so the U.S. has decided to levy those sanctions against Turkey, which is, of course, super crazy because it's a U.S. ally. I think one of the things this shows is just how far the U.S. has gone with this economic warfare. They're leveling it even against allies now. It's a lot of sanctions. I'm surprised, more countries aren't looking for ways to get around these sanctions to be done with the U.S.'s economic tyranny. The last story I have, this again from Dave DeCamp at antiwar.com, and that is the Trump administration is moving forward with arms sales to Morocco. It's going to be a $1 million sale of advanced drones and precision-guided munitions. This is a country that is involved in a border dispute. There's this area on the map. I forget what grade I was in. I asked my teacher what Western Sahara was, and she goes, "Oh, I bet nobody lives there. It's just empty desert." It's actually a place where a couple 100,000 people live, and they want independence, and Morocco wants to control the whole thing. And so the U.S. is going to apparently aid Morocco more in that by selling potentially 4 MQ-9BC Guardian drones made by General Atomics, and then some munitions made by Lockheed Martin Raytheon, which likely is the company of the incoming Secretary of Defense, and Boeing, another military industrial complex country. This, of course, is a part of the Abraham Accords, which Trump now has signed on for majority Arab countries to normalize relations overtly with Israel. Although Morocco is another country that's much like the UAE, has very, long-standing ties with Israel. It's not like Syria, where the Israel's been bombing there for several years. This is a country that doesn't have like active hostilities with Israel, and so if they're able to profit off it by two things now, getting the U.S. to recognize their claim to Western Sahara, and now all these drones, it probably seems like a pretty good deal to them to, just give up on the Palestinian cause. All right, that's all I have for the show this week. I hope everybody's enjoying. I'm going to continue to have on more guests. Now, next week is Christmas, and the week after is the week of New Year's. I'm going to try to put out 5 shows in the next 2 weeks. I'm not sure what the scheduling of those shows will be, especially potentially next Friday, which I think is Christmas. I may skip that show, and then I'll have shows all normal the week after. Holidays, got to spend a little extra time with family, enjoy yourself a little bit more. So I'm going to try to do that. I hope all of you do the same. But let me tell you, news does come out during the holidays, and I am going to cover it. Even if I skip a show, I'll probably just do one a little bit longer or something like that. Check out the show, especially the YouTube channel. Go to the Libertarian Institute, check out my news roundup and the show. They're both on the homepage there. Also, a lot of the great guests I've had on the show recently: Keith Knight, Pete Quinones, Connor Freeman. I know I'm forgetting somebody else too. That I think Scott Spalding. I saw his article on the Libertarian Institute. Look, all those writers are great. So check out that, and I'll be back in the news shows next week.